How tough is it to build an EMP?
Any nuclear weapon that will generate an electromagnetic pulse, but there are also non-nuclear EMP weapons that would be part of this scenario. The U.S. Air Force has one called CHAMP. It's basically a cruise missile, and it carries a non-nuclear EMP generator, and it doesn't generate a field as big as a nuclear weapon. I mean, a single nuclear weapon is really all you'd need to take out the whole U.S. electric grid, detonated at very high altitude. But with a couple of dozen, maybe 20 of these cruise missiles or drones carrying non-nuclear electromagnetic pulse generators, they would follow the power lines. And it would take hours instead of a second, but they could achieve the same thing and black out the power grid. Countries like Iran and even terrorist groups are capable of harnessing non-nuclear EMP weapons and using them in this way. They have the sophistication to do that. So it's not hard at all. As a matter of fact, if you had the money, you can actually buy EMP devices, not intended to be used as weapons, but they could be used as weapons. There's a device called the EMP suitcase that looks just like a suitcase. It's designed to be operated and carried by one man. It puts out 100,000 volts per meter over a short distance, 100 yards.
That right there?
Yes, that's it.
How much does something like that go for?
I think 50,000. Okay,
so it's not a lot of money.
Not for a terrorist group or a nation state. But if you had a terrorist or a criminal or a disgruntled individual got one of those things and he put it in the trunk of his car and he drove up to an extra high voltage power substation. I mean, you see these when you drive down the highway all the time. We've arrived at a place technologically where a single individual could topple the technological pillars of civilization for an entire metropolitan area like Miami or New York or Boston just by himself, just with that. And if you had
just with that?
Yeah, and if you had a team of guys running around the country, you could black out the whole national electric grid just with these devices.
How come it's not happened yet?
Well, it has happened in Chechnya and other places. It hasn't happened in this country yet. Well, give them time. I don't know why it hasn't happened yet. We've been lucky. The great German statesman Otto von Bismarck once said, God looks after fools, drunkards, little children, and the United States of America. Maybe that's why it hasn't happened.
But has anyone been caught attempting to do something of this capacity?
We haven't caught somebody with the RF briefcase yet, but we have caught. Actually, I haven't caught the person, but there was a drone in Pennsylvania. Somebody flew a drone that tried to make a different kind of an attack against the power line. I'm not sure I want to get into all the technical details. There was an incident not too long ago that happened in Canada where a disgruntled individual used, it wasn't a radio frequency weapon, but it was a different technology, even simpler, that enabled him to black out temporarily the Hydro-Quebec grid in Canada, put millions of people into the dark. They did correct it after a day, but one guy did that. And so there have been attacks on electric grids here in North America. There were attacks in the electric grid in Mexico back in 2013, the Knights Templars, they're a drug cartel. They used explosives and small arms to attack, to black out the electric grid in a province of Mexico. They put about 500,000 people into the dark so that they could go into the towns and villages and publicly execute people who were opposed to the drugs trade, the village elders and leaders who were opposed to the drug trade. So if Neanderthals like the Knights Templars have figured out that the electric grid is a keystone societal vulnerability, just think what Al-Qaeda or ISIS or North Korea and these much more sophisticated actors could do. We're very lucky. I mean, I was kind of surprised when ISIS was on the ropes that they didn't just pay the Knights Templars to come across the border. I mean, and say, hey, go do to the United States what you guys did in Mexico. We've been. I think the reason it hasn't happened yet is because we've been lucky.
These guys are from Michoacan. They're Michoacan and Jalisco.
That was the province that
I know a lot of people from Michoacan and Jalisco. We got to keep an eye on them.
Yeah,
good friends. By the way, going back to this, so you know what I would do if I was the U.S. government? I would buy that company who sells those suitcases. Everybody that buys it, they would be on alert. That's exactly what I would do.
Yeah.
There's no way in the world I'm going to let that stay without. I'd overpay to find out who the hell is doing this. I'd go into a partnership and figure out. I'd have a CIA guy working for that company.
I have to point out so I don't get sued, okay?
Yeah.
But that has legitimate peaceful purposes. They don't intend it to be used as a weapon.
Oh, I'm not worried about. There's guns that are intended to peaceful purposes,
Yeah, I
but
know.
in the wrong guy's hand. That's the one thing.
Exactly. It's potentially a weapon of mass
How do you use that for peaceful purposes?
And you don't even need a license to buy it, unlike a gun. You need a license to buy a gun, but you can buy that without a license.
How is that used for peaceful purposes, though?
Well, if you're designing an airport, for example, okay, and you want to know how far away do I have to put the runway so that the radars don't fry the electronics in airplanes when they're landing. Well, you can use a device like that to simulate the pulse that's coming off the radar to see how far things have to be spaced. Or if you're laying out, if you've got a factory and it's got a lot of heavy electronic equipment, drill presses, metal bending equipment, stuff that uses a lot of electricity, they put out powerful electromagnetic transients. And this kind of equipment is spaced too closely together. They can fry each other and commit fratricide, okay? So you need to know how far apart do I have, how thick does the shielding have to be? And that's what it's intended to be used for, to help you, you don't want to have to move the equipment in and learn by experience, how far apart should I have put the drill presses and things like that. That's what it's intended for. So it does have a legitimate purpose, but perhaps but perhaps it should be licensed, and we should have better control.
You're kidding me? Yeah.
And perhaps just anybody shouldn't be able to purchase. But we're not the only ones. I mean, this is a U.S. company. There's a German company that sells these things. I'm sure terrorists already have them, and terrorists have used them in Chechnya. You asked why it hasn't happened here. The Chechen terrorists figured out how to use them against the Russians in Chechnya. They used them to kill the electronics so they could go in and kill everybody in a military base.
Let me ask you a question. Earlier, you were talking about nuclear shelters. So I pulled up a couple numbers here. Israel has nuclear shelters. I think Sweden has like 63,000 or something nuclear shelters. A lot of different countries have nuclear shelters. So whether that is something we have or not, it's definitely not talked about openly amongst people. Do we have nuclear shelters in cities and communities where if something were to happen, here's what we have?
FIBA would probably say we do, okay? But there's an enormous difference between what FEMA did, back when we had a significant civil defense program. You've probably seen those civil defense signs, the radioactive symbol. Sometimes they'll be in the basement of a library or something like that. That's what our shelter is, Those aren't the kinds of shelters they've got in Russia, okay? These are not serious shelters that are designed to survive, a nuclear war. They will provide you. It's better than nothing. I mean, it's better to be in the shelter of a library, okay, if a nuclear blast happens, or if there's radioactive fallout coming down, so you don't get directly exposed to it. But we don't have anything like what the Russians have got. In the intelligence community, they're called deep underground shelters, or DUGs. All right, I'm talking about. Some of the more famous ones are Chekhov and Sharapova, Kazvinsky Mountain, Yamantau Mountain. These are shelters that are hundreds of meters deep on solid granite. They're impervious to nuclear attack.
Is that a form of a shelter right there? Is that a nuclear shelter?
Well, I think that's a missile silo.
Do you know what these shelters look like? Like, does this look? This says a Moscow nuclear shelter right here. Is this kind of what it looks like?
It's hard for me to see over there. I don't have my.
I'd just be curious. I'd be curious to know what these nuclear shelters look like. Yeah, that's the one I was looking at right there.
I think that's a.
Russia ready for doomsday. It's deeply buried.
I think that's a missile silo. I mean, that looks like the headworks for a missile silo, but that could be the headworks to one of their shelters. But that looks like a missile silo to me.
So FEMA would say we have nuclear shelters?
They probably would, because they're optimists, and they always put the best possible spin on things. But we don't. Even for our political military leadership, the most famous shelter in the America is Cheyenne Mountain. NORAD the NORAD alternate headquarters. Okay, this was built designed in the late 40s and early 50s, and it was designed to survive an atomic attack.
Where's that?
It's in Cheyenne Mountain.
Is that Wyoming? Where's that?
Yeah, near Peterson Air Force Base. Don't know the state as well as I do. I think it's in Colorado. But I'm not absolutely sure the state. But it's very close to Peterson Air Force Base, which is NORAD headquarters and Space Command headquarters. And Cheyenne Mountain is located near there. It used to be. It's now the alternate headquarters. And it's inside of a mountain, and the buildings are on springs to survive a shock wave. And that's the best, hardest facility we have. That facility will not survive an attack from a hydrogen bomb. It'll survive an atomic bomb, but it's not hard enough for an atomic bomb, a hydrogen bomb. Their shelters will survive attacks, probably even by our most powerful weapon, which was the B-83. And some of these shelters we call them shelters, but Yamantau Mountain, for example, and we still don't know the purpose. Maybe it's for these oligarchs who are fleeing to the Ural Mountains. But the Yamantau Mountain facility is like an underground city that can survive a nuclear attack.
Is this a nuclear shelter? This is an article Guardian did saying how the U.S. has prepared for nuclear Armageddon. In this picture, they're talking about this was something they started working on since the Truman days.
Oh, how is prepared? I don't know. That looks like. I know that some millionaires have purchased old Atlas silos, and that looks like one of those. And this Atlas was hardened to survive an attack.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.